You were not born to kneel, but you do, every morning, not on marble floors before kings, but in the bathroom mirror, before your own reflection. You wash your face, comb your hair, button the shirt. Each movement is a ritual, quiet, sacred, deadening, a daily resurrection, not of the self, but of the mask. Carl Jung called it the persona, the face you wear for the world. But this face, it does not feel like your own. It smiles on command. It speaks in practiced tones, obeys. You leave the house and step into a world built on unwritten scripts. Greet, nod, apologize, agree. The choreography of the civilized, yet beneath your skin, something stirs. A scream wrapped in silence, a wildness taught to behave. Do you remember when you stopped being wild? Was it the first time they told you to sit still? To stop interrupting, to be nice? Somewhere between your first report card and your last promotion, you learned that to belong, you must bend. To be loved, you must shrink. So you folded yourself into something acceptable, predictable, polite, and the world smiled back. Not at you, but at the well-behaved ghost wearing your name. Nietzsche warned of this. The herd. Not as community, but as comfort masquerading as morality, he wrote. The man who does not want to be part of the herd must be willing to be hated. And who among us was ready to be hated, so we obeyed? It's not because the rules made sense, but because they offered safety. Not because we were weak, but because we were afraid to be strong. Alone, we clung to golden chains, polished by generations. Tradition, etiquette, professionalism. We call them freedom. But Schopenhauer saw through the illusion. He saw that suffering persists, even behind the prettiest lies. The pain didn't leave. It just grew quieter, more refined. This is the beautiful prison of obedience, where nothing burns, but nothing breathes. It is the silence between yes and no. The life lived on mute. You followed every rule, climbed every ladder, smiled through every betrayal of your truth. And now you find yourself surrounded by everything you were told to want, yet haunted by everything you truly are. Kierkegaard called it despair, not the loud kind, but the slow erosion of the self, not knowing who you are, or worse, knowing but being too afraid to live it. This is not depression. It is the soul's quiet rebellion, a longing for authenticity in a world that rewards performance. We become strangers to our own voices, prisoners in polite conversations, ghosts in our own lives. Jung taught that the way out is not forward, but inward, that beyond the mask lies the shadow, the forgotten wildness, the unspoken rage, the untamed truth, the parts of you that were exiled to make you lovable. But to reclaim your soul, you must meet them, not to destroy them, but to remember them. Because obedience, when unexamined, becomes self-erasure. And to truly live, you must become whole again. The civilized and the wild, the calm and the chaos. Alan Watts whispered, "You are under no obligation to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago. You are not your job title, not your politeness, not your ability to follow instructions. You are the space behind your eyes, the fire that never fully went out. You were not born to kneel, you were born to see, to choose, to stand, not above others, but within yourself." Obedience was never the enemy, but blind obedience is the slowest kind of death, and today you choose to live. The mask we forgot we wore the first time you were told to sit still. You don't understand why. Your legs are moving with the rhythm of something ancient, a joy without reason, a dance without music, but a stern voice interrupts it. Stop that. Quiet down. Behave. So you freeze, and the world applauds your stillness. You don't know it yet, but this is the first mask, the one made not of paint or plastic, but of praise. They call it maturity, discipline, good behavior, but what it truly is the death of the wild. Carl Jung called it the persona, the face we learn to wear so the world will clap for us. You are rewarded not for being whole, but for being pleasant, not for being true, but for being tame. At home, they call it respect. Yes. At school, obedience. At church, righteousness. And you, eager to be loved, oblige. You learn to nod even when your chest screams no, to smile when your stomach coils in protest, to apologize when you are not sorry, to say nothing when silence is betrayal. And each time you do, the world claps louder. But something deep inside you stops clapping. The child begins to disappear, replaced by performance, by structure, by consistency. A good child becomes a good student. A good student becomes a good employee. A good employee becomes a good citizen. A good citizen forgets they were ever alive. Schopenhauer once said that suffering is not something we escape, but something we wear, like skin. And so even as the world praises you, something aches in you. Quietly, you do not bleed, you simply dim. The ache is not loud, it is not dramatic. It is the ache of unlived fire. You sit in rooms that do not know your name. You agree to rules that choke your lungs. You laugh at jokes that bruise your soul. You tell yourself this is safety. But deep in your subconscious, another voice whispers. One that does not care about approval. One that remembers, does not speak in words, but in dreams, in frustration, sudden anger at nothing, in the fatigue that coffee cannot cure. This is the shadow, the part of you that you locked away to be worthy, the part you feared would ruin everything if you let it breathe. The rage, the hunger, the howl. You were taught to fear this part of yourself, to call it dangerous, inappropriate, unholy, but perhaps what is unholy is a life where you never truly feel. Kierkegaard called it despair, not the theatrical kind, but the despair of forgetting who you are, not the pain of loss, but the pain of absence, looking in the mirror and seeing only a resume, a calendar, a smile stretched too tight. We fear our shadow because it threatens to unravel the mask. But the mask is what's killing us. Not all at once, but slowly, politely, with compliments. You were not born to perform. You were born to be. But being is messy, unpredictable, wild. The institutions around you, school, family, religion, are afraid of wildness. So they taught you to trade your soul for structure, your truth for tradition. Not out of evil, but out of fear. The world does not know what to do with a person who cannot be categorized. And so, it teaches you to categorize yourself, to simplify, to flatten, to conform. And in exchange, you are promised safety. But this safety is suffocating. Nietzsche saw it. The way we choose the herd over the abyss. The way we flatten ourselves so we can belong. But the price of the herd is your voice. It is your chaos, your madness, your truth. It is everything about you that does not fit into a spreadsheet or social script. And yet, it is the most real part of you. Alan Watts once said, "The self we try to preserve is an illusion, that what we truly are has no name, no role, no mask. It is the witness, the watcher behind the eyes, the space behind the thoughts. You were not born to be obedient. You were not born to be managed. You were born to be whole, to remember the parts of yourself that make others uncomfortable, to walk into your shadow and say, 'I see you, and I will not run.' The child you once were still lives in the forest where you left him, barefoot, untamed, screaming at the wind with joy and rage. He is waiting, not to be saved, but to be reclaimed. He does not need your mask. He needs your return. And when you finally go back to him, you will not need to kneel. You will not need to explain. You'll only need to remember. There is a strange warmth in belonging. It's not the warmth of truth, but the warmth of a blanket pulled over the eyes. Soft, familiar, safe. You feel it when you agree, when you nod instead of protest. When you smile, though, you feel the silence swelling inside. The herd does not require your soul, only your presence. It asks nothing of your genius, only your agreement. And so, you offer it. You abandon your fire in exchange for the comfort of approval. Nietzsche called it the morality of the herd, a slow sedation of the spirit. Here, obedience replaces strength, and agreement masks weakness. It is not the courage to think, but the comfort of being told. You choose to sit when you wish to stand. You laugh when you ache. You say yes, when your entire body is begging to scream no, and they praise you for it. They call you polite, easy to work with, a team player. But the applause begins to sound like rain on an empty rooftop. Hollow, relentless, distant. You are not wrong for wanting to belong. This longing is older than thought. When our ancestors were cast from the group, they did not lose friends. They lost life. Exile was death. Somewhere in your blood that fear still whispers. Be careful. Don't stand out. Don't speak too loudly. Don't be strange. And so you learn to shrink, to round your edges, to file down your truth until it fits neatly into someone else's narrative. You choose comfort. Over confrontation, you choose the crowd. Over clarity, you become invisible. Not because no one sees you, but because what they see is not you. Kierkegaard called it despair. Not the scream of suffering, but the quiet starvation of the soul. Not a wound, but a fading. It does not come like a storm. It comes like still water. You wake up in the same bed, drink the same coffee, walk the same path. You smile at familiar faces, answer familiar emails, perform the same agreeable self. And inside, your soul curls inward like a flower folding in on itself after too many nights without sun. You do not cry. You do not scream. You just stop. Burning. Alan Watts once said that the self we cling to is only an idea, a pattern. And in the herd, you become that pattern. Predictable, safe, restrained. You live as an echo, never the voice, as a shadow, never the flame. You begin to forget what it felt like to stand in your own truth, naked, sharp, and real, because to do so would mean risking exile. And exile, even now, still feels like death. But here's the quiet cruelty of the herd. It gives you comfort, but not connection. It gives you familiarity, but not freedom. It gives you a place, but takes away your name. You speak, but not with your voice. You act, but not from your will. You become a simulation of what others approve. Sculpture, beautiful to everyone but yourself. Carl Jung warned of this. He knew the danger of forgetting the self in favor of the mask, of trading individuation, the path to wholeness, for external acceptance. And the longer you remain in the herd, the more foreign your own soul becomes. You look in the mirror and do not recognize what stares back. You feel hunger, but not for food. You feel tired, but not from effort. What you feel is the weight of your unlived life. Schopenhauer wrote of suffering not as punishment, but as the very pulse of existence. And when you live a life not your own, suffering takes on a new form. It no longer screams. It waits. It becomes politeness, routine, compromise, a death by 1,000 small nods. You begin to question, what have I become? Not in a moment of drama, but in the stillness between emails, the silence between words at dinner, a hollow smile after another agreeable conversation. You begin to realize, it is not better to be wrong with the group than to be right alone. It is not safer to vanish than to burn. You were not born to be consumed by consensus. You were born to stand, to feel, to choose. Even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is hated, even when it is alone. The herd will not applaud your awakening. It will ask, what's wrong with you? And for the first time, you will answer, nothing. I've just stopped pretending. The abyss of niceness, you smile, not because you're happy, but because it's easier than explaining why you're not. Your voice is gentle, measured, appropriate. You say all the right things, make all the right gestures, applaud at the right moments. But beneath the surface, your soul is holding its breath, not screaming, not crying, just suffocating. Quietly, beautifully. We live in the age of niceness, where smiles are currency and honesty is a crime. You are taught to be agreeable, to never offend, to fit. You nod in meetings. You compliment people you don't admire. You apologize when you've done nothing wrong. You laugh at jokes that bruise your spirit. And no one notices the quiet tragedy unfolding behind your eyes, because you're so nice. But niceness is not goodness. Politeness is not peace. They are disguises. Elegant lies. You have become a diplomat of your own discontent, negotiating with yourself so you can keep the world comfortable. But every time you obey a rule you don't believe in, every time you shrink your truth to avoid discomfort, something in you withers. Not dramatically, but slowly. It's like a candle with no flame, only smoke. Kierkegaard called it despair, not sadness, but the quiet sickness of not being yourself. The worst kind of despair, he said, is not knowing you're in it. It wears a suit, answers emails, says thank you and I'm fine. It's not a breakdown, it's a performance. A flawless act of appearing whole while slowly crumbling inside. You wake up each day and place yourself into a world that rewards masks and punishes mirrors. You say what they want to hear, become what they expect. You don't dare speak what might disturb the peace, because you've confused peace with compliance. You've confused being liked with being alive. You were not born this way. You were born raw, untamed, honest. You once cried without shame, screamed when you were angry, spoke what you felt without rehearsing at first. But that honesty was too much for a world built on convenience. And so, they trained it out of you, rewarded your silence, punished your wildness, called your sensitivity weakness, and slowly you complied, not because you wanted to, but because you wanted to be loved. Carl Jung knew this war well, the tension between the persona and the shadow. The persona is the mask you learn to wear, the nice one, the reliable one, the one who never causes trouble, but beneath it, your shadow waits. Not evil, not wrong, just honest. It holds the anger you suppressed, the truths you never spoke, the boundaries you never set. It remembers who you were before you were edited, before you were told to choose harmony over honesty, and yet you continue. You obey not because it is right, but because it is easy. You avoid conflict, not because you're at peace, but because you fear what might happen if you finally say what you mean. You wear the mask so well that even you forget it's a mask. But somewhere in your body, your stomach, your chest, the heaviness behind your eyes, you remember. You feel the ache of unspoken truth. Alan Watts warned us that the illusion of the self is the greatest source of suffering. The self that just goes along. The self that smiles for survival. The self that lives for the expectations of others. But it is not you. It is your armor, your disguise. And the longer you wear it, the harder it becomes to take it off, because by then, you've built a life around it, a career, a relationship, a reputation. To be yourself would mean risking all of it, and that is terrifying. But what's more terrifying is living a life where no one truly knows you, not even you. What's more terrifying is being praised for being agreeable, when deep down, you feel like a stranger to your own voice. What's more terrifying is realizing that the version of you everyone loves is a performance. And the real you has been waiting backstage for years, tired, forgotten, still holding the script you were too afraid to read. Schopenhauer said, "We suffer because we crave what cannot be given from outside. Not applause, not agreement, not acceptance, but meaning. And meaning does not come from being liked, it comes from being true. There is a violence so quiet, so civilized, that we forget it is violence at all. It wears a tie. It signs memos. It smiles in meetings, and it enforces a code. A code written not in blood, but in expectations. Be professional. Be polite. Be normal. And so, you fold yourself into something that can pass through the day without causing a ripple. But inside, you are burning. Rules, they say, keep the world from falling apart. What? But most rules aren't born from wisdom. They're born from fear. Not the sacred fear of a storm, but the trembling fear of disorder. The fear that if people started saying what they mean, or wanting what they truly want, the whole thing would crack. So we build cages and call them codes. We bind instinct in barbed wire and call it morality. We trim the wild and call it civilized. Schopenhauer knew. He saw that suffering was not an accident, not something to be fixed, but something intrinsic. Yeah. To be alive is to suffer. To desire is to ache. And yet we spend our lives constructing illusions to pretend otherwise. We follow the rules like choreography, believing that if we obey enough lines, we'll escape the ache of existence. But suffering cannot be outsmarted, only buried. Underneath our polished norms, there is rot. Underneath politeness, rage. Underneath small talk, isolation. Underneath I'm fine, the quiet scream of a soul that hasn't been heard in years. We suffer in silence, not because we must, but because we've been told that suffering aloud is impolite. That pain should be hidden like a shameful wound beneath polite laughter and borrowed etiquette. Yes. Carl Jung warned us of the cost. When we obey rules without questioning them, we disown parts of ourselves. We exile the shadow, not because it is wrong, but because it doesn't fit. The wild voice, the primal scream, the messy truth, all pushed into the basement of our psyche. And the more we obey, the more fractured we become. We wear the persona, but we are haunted by the ghost of who we might have been. We are told not to question, because questioning is the beginning of freedom. And freedom, they say, leads to chaos. But what if chaos is where truth begins? What if the moment you shatter the script is the moment you finally hear your own voice? There is a scene you play out every day. You nod when you disagree, but you smile when you ache. You call people sir, though your soul wants to scream. You shake hands with the very thing that devours your time, your energy, your essence, and you call this order. But order at the cost of your truth is not order. It is a mausoleum with flowers. Nietzsche called it the herd morality. A morality not built from inner truth, but from conformity. A morality where the highest virtue is to belong. Even if it means betraying yourself every day. When someone breaks free, the herd doesn't rejoice. It recoils. Because freedom, real freedom, reminds the obedient of their chains. Sometimes, the most violent thing is not rebellion, but obedience to a lie. It's a kind of obedience that turns fire into silence, its passion into routine, spirit into function. The kind of obedience that makes you apologize for your own aliveness. Alan Watts said, "The self we cling to is an illusion, a pattern we perform to be seen as acceptable. But who are you when no one is watching? Who are you when the rules have no grip? When there is no script to follow? When nothing is for display? That is where the truth waits." Kierkegaard called it inwardness. That sacred, trembling space where the soul confronts its real face. Not the face you show the world. It's not the one that plays along, but the one that questions, wrestles, wants, and dares to walk the paradox of freedom and fear. The world does not need more politeness. It needs more truth, more trembling honesty, more souls willing to say, "This rule does not honor me. This smile is a cage. This performance is a tomb. This order is a lie." So the next time you feel yourself shrinking to fit someone else's box, pause. Feel the heat of disobedience rising in your blood. That is not sin. That is awakening. You are not here to obey. You are here to become. And becoming requires rupture. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for your soul is to break a rule. And finally, step into the chaos that makes you whole. Meeting the shadow, there is a room beneath the skin. Dark, locked, untouched for years. You feel it when you lie politely, when you nod instead of scream, when you stay, though your soul is begging to leave. It is the place where your discarded truths gather, where the parts of you you weren't allowed to be have curled into silence, and they are waiting. In childhood, you learned how to survive. You were told, be nice, be quiet, be good. So you buried your chaos, your fire, your teeth. You learned to smile while bleeding inside, to perform, to adapt, to disappear, not because you were weak, but because you were wise, because disappearing was safer than being seen. But the shadow never dies. It waits. It watches. It lives in the tension between what you want to say and what you do. It speaks through your passive rage, your sleepless nights, your inexplicable ache for something you can't name. Carl Jung called it the shadow, not a demon, but a mirror, not evil, but exiled. There comes a moment, if you're honest, when you stop running, you descend. Not in glory, but in quiet. Staircase in a dream. Rusty dust, covered leading down and down, till you reach the door you promised never to open. The door marked, unacceptable. You open it. And there he is, the one who wanted too much, the one who said no. The one who didn't smile. The one who didn't care about approval. It's the beast you called dangerous. The desire you called shame. The rage you called sin. But he's not monstrous. He's you without apology. You before the world edited you. To meet the shadow is to break a mirror and see what you've avoided. That your politeness was a prison. that your obedience was betrayal, that your goodness was performance. But this is not rebellion for rebellion's sake. This is not rage against the world. This is the holy and terrifying act of reclaiming what you are. The paradox Kierkegaard spoke of, that only by facing despair do we touch inwardness, that to truly choose light, you must know your dark. There is a kind of disobedience that is sacred. The disobedience of saying, I will no longer lie, not to you, not to myself. To say no and mean it, even when your voice trembles. To walk away without needing permission. To let the script burn and write your own line in the ashes, Alan Watts reminded us. The self we protect is just a mask, a pattern, a process. We confuse it for who we are, but beneath the mask is something real, something untamed, alive, not perfect, but whole. And Nietzsche. He stood at the edge of the abyss and did not flinch. Become who you are, he said. But to become is not gentle, it is a rupture, falling apart before the forming, to stand alone without the herd, to become the one who chooses, not the one who complies. When you meet your shadow, you do not conquer it. You listen. You sit across from it like an old friend, and you say, I see you now. The rage, the lust, the selfishness, the need, the ache to be sovereign, and something happens. Not a war, but a return. You are no longer fragmented, no longer at war with your own nature. You're no longer half alive. Schopenhauer once said, suffering is the essence of life. But so is the courage to stop hiding. You suffer by pretending. You suffer by obeying a life that is not yours. But in the shadow, you suffer honestly. And through that suffering, you become real. The monster under your bed was never out to harm you. He only wanted to be seen. Once you do, once you look him in the eye, you realize he is not the enemy. He is your power, is your passion, your truth. He is the voice that whispers, you were never meant to be small. The descent is not the end. It is the beginning, the birth of the individuated self, the wholeness beyond performance, soul after masks. You leave that room not pure, but real. You walk into the world not clean, but whole. And now, when you say yes, it comes from truth, not fear. Let them call you dangerous. Let them call you selfish. Let them call you wrong. They are still hiding, but you have seen the shadow, and now you are free. You do not return from the abyss with a roar. You do not scream your arrival. You do not shatter the gates of conformity with fire in your eyes. You emerge slowly, like a flame under water, like a god who has remembered he is dreaming. You are quieter now, but not because you are unsure. You are quiet because you no longer need to explain. The herd watches you. They do not understand. You were one of them once, clothed in the skin of approval, nourished by the milk of obedience. Smiled when it was time to smile. You bowed when it was time to bow. Clapped when the rules told you it was time. And yet, you always felt the fracture. A silent scream behind the mask. You lived in the theater of expectations, playing a character in a story you never wrote. Then came the descent. The doorless room, the shadow's face. The truth that tasted like blood. You met the chaos, not to destroy it, but to understand it. You stood naked before all that you are and did not run.
Wow.
You walk among them again, but not as one of them. You do not shout, you do not argue. You do not beg them to see. You simply walk, and the ground remembers your steps. This is what Nietzsche meant. The Bermensch is not a tyrant, not a rebel, not a god among ants. He is the man who has walked through the graveyard of his own illusions, buried every borrowed belief, and carved his soul into form with the chisel of pain. He creates not out of defiance, but out of clarity. He obeys no one, not even himself. Because even the self can become a tyrant. Alan Watts called the self an illusion with good marketing, an echo we mistake for a voice. But the one who has seen behind the veil knows this, that the silence beneath thought is more real than the thought itself. That identity is not something you have, it is something you wear, and sometimes, to be free you must undress. You have become a stillness they cannot shake. You no longer move from impulse, but from knowing. You no longer react, you respond. You no longer rush, you watch. There is violence in your calm, not of harm, but of truth. The world says, be agreeable, be successful, be normal. But the soul that has returned from the abyss knows that normal is a graveyard, a place where the living go to be silent about their suffering, a place where masks are inherited like heirlooms, but you have burned yours. Schopenhauer was right. Suffering is not optional. It is the very pulse of existence. But the awakened soul no longer hides from it. He sits beside it as one would sit beside fire. He listens to its crackling and learns. This is not the rebellion of fire and fists. This is the rebellion of being. You are no longer defined by what you oppose. You're defined by what you are. By the values you have bled to create. By the silence you no longer fear. By the paradox you have learned to live. Kierkegaard whispered of inwardness. The lonely road into the self that terrifies the herd. You took it. And now you are alone but whole. You do not seek permission. You do not seek applause. You speak because it is true, not because it is safe. You act not from rebellion, but from resonance. You break the rule not out of hate, but because love cannot live inside a lie. The quiet strength of the disobedient soul is not the strength of war. It is the strength of choosing yourself every day, even when it costs everything. Even when it means being misunderstood, being feared, being alone, especially then. You have become what the world does not know how to name, not because you are above it, but because you are no longer beneath it. Not because you dominate, but because you do not need to. Not because you are unbreakable, but because you are real. And real things do not shatter, they transform. The world offers you 1,000 masks. You do not wear them. The world offers you 1,000 scripts. You write your own. The world offers you comfort at the cost of your soul. You walk past it, barefoot and burning, because truth, even when it hurts, is holy. In freedom, even when it costs, is sacred. You are not here to fit in. You are here to remember, to create, to burn quietly and remind the world what it forgot. This is the quiet strength of the disobedient soul, the one who returned not as a soldier, but as a mirror. And in that reflection, the world will see not a rebel, but a possibility. Obedience was the lie. You are the answer. There is no grand applause here, no marching anthem, no crown waiting on a pedestal, only a mirror and silence. You stand before it, not as a hero, not as a savior, but as something far rarer, as yourself. Not the version you crafted for others, not the persona stitched together by praise and fear, but the raw, trembling self that remained after the fire. The one you tried to bury under roles and routines, the one that never stopped whispering, even when the world screamed louder. Obedience was the lie. The golden leash disguised as virtue. It said, follow the path, play your part, stay within the lines. And in return, it offered safety, a safety paid for with your soul. You were taught that to disobey was to fall. But what if falling was the only way to fly? Kierkegaard called it the leap, movement not of the body, but of the spirit, a faith that defies logic, a trust without evidence, not in dogma, but in the self, that silent core where fear and truth become indistinguishable. You take the leap, not because you are certain, but because you are real, and that is enough. Rules are not sacred. They are scaffolding, useful until they become cages. Spent years climbing their architecture, believing there was meaning at the top. The meaning does not live in what is inherited. It lives in what is chosen. You were not born to serve the map. You were born to chart your own sea. This is what Nietzsche meant. The Bermensch is not a god above men. He is the man who says yes to what terrifies him. He walks without a path, not because he is reckless, but because he knows that every true step must come from within. Jung warned of the dangers of a life unlived, of the shadow ignored, of the mask mistaken for the face. He spoke of individuation, the slow, painful marriage of light and dark. The courage to be whole, and here you are, standing on the altar of paradox, your shadow beside you, not as enemy, but as witness. You did not conquer it, you held its hand. And in doing so, you became. Schopenhauer said, life is suffering, but not all suffering is punishment. Some pain is invitation, Some wounds are doors. You bled, but the blood spoke, and the pain taught you to see. Silence, once a prison, became your temple. Stillness, once feared, became your teacher. Alan Watts would smile now, because you have seen it, haven't you? The illusion, the stage, the script, the puppet you mistook for yourself. You watched it fall away, bit by bit, truth by painful truth, until only this remained. You, not as an object in a world, but as the world itself, looking back. And now, you stand where maps fail, where logic collapses. You are not here to be safe. You are here to become what no rule could predict, what no system could birth, what no God could guarantee. Not perfect, but real. Not certain, but whole. Not obedient, but free. So what now? What do you live for when no one is watching? When there is no reward, no punishment, no crowd to applaud or scorn? What remains when obedience dies? What rises when rules fall? You are the answer. Not because you are special, but because you are true. Because you have walked through despair without a map. Because you have loved without permission. Because you've said yes to the void and found it staring back, not as enemy, but as mirror. This is not a manifesto. There are no commandments here, no neat truths to hold like weapons. Only a breath, a stillness, a choice, and the sacred weight of your own becoming. You are not here to obey. You are not here to be told what is right. You are not here to color inside someone else's lines. You are here to write your own scripture, to live it, to suffer for it, to burn for it, to rise from it. At the edge of all that is known, the herd shivers. They ask for certainty. They beg for signs. But you step forward, eyes open, hands empty, heart full. Leap, not into chaos, but into possibility. Not into darkness, but into truth. Not because you know what's waiting, but because you know who you are. The cost of obedience was your soul. The reward of disobedience is yourself. And in the end, that was the only heaven worth finding.